Hey everyone, I'm gonna keep this intro short and sweet because I want to hop right into the video. But for some context, I'm doing a little challenge that I made for myself where I attempt to remaster Avatar: The Last Airbender as a way to dip my foot into the world of animation and to get my creative juices flowing. In my most recent remaster, I showed Zuko getting absolutely cooked by Aang in his Avatar state form. So to make up for this embarrassing display, I decided to give Zuko a chance at redemption to regain his honor by displaying his Agni Kai against Commander Zhao. So before we get started, please leave a like if you had fun watching, subscribe if you want to see more, and most importantly, I really hope you enjoy this video. The very first couple of scenes I'm going to tackle feature our two combatants kneeling away from each other as a way to prepare for the upcoming duel. Just like them, I am also using this scene as a way to prepare myself and warm up for more of the action-heavy sequences coming up. I first started with a mountain in the back, which I like to consider them as earthy icebergs. They took absolutely no time at all, and I worked upon this entrance arch-looking thing. I don't really know what they're called. I used the color picker tool to match the material of what I'm assuming is stone, and after I colored everything else in, I did the ground just as quickly. My attention then immediately shifted upon to the left side of the frame, and I could say that the gate here was very difficult, but my mom didn't raise no liar. The gate was actually super easy along with the sky and the ground. All in all, these were very nice warm-up scenes. The next section of this segment features the best character in the show. And no, not you, Zuko.
Don't flatter yourself.
Although Zuko is up there as one of my favorites, I'm talking about the legend, Uncle Iroh. Due to my laziness, however, I may have made Iroh look very wide, just to avoid doing more of the background. But let's just say he had one too many roast ducks prior to this scene. The archway in Zuko's background has more going on, and it did give me a slight issue originally, but I did end up fixing the non-parallel lines off screen later on. Moving the camera around from the back of Iroh to the front, and luckily for me, this is another instance of the background being extremely still. This was a very relaxing frame. I ended up popping up some YouTube videos or some podcasts and just drawing away. It was almost relaxing enough that I wanted to drink some tea while Uncle Iroh would stare into my very soul, but I'm actually not the biggest fan of tea. Uncle Iroh would probably be pretty disappointed in me.
Oh, it's horrible. No, thank you.
Sick of tea? That's like being sick of breathing.
The sides here were very easy, and nothing you see here is that different from the prior scenes, so let's move on. Taking a look into Iroh's POV, we can see a pretty close look at Zuko as he stands up from his kneeling position. This is also our first scene of the video where the camera moves around with a background. The first task I worked on involved drawing the outline of Zuko's shoulders and then coloring them in. I don't think they looked too out of place, so I happily waltzed my pencil on over to the ground. Since the original animation's background moves around, I had to make sure my background follows along with it. That means drawing more of the ground outside the frame to get that seamless movement look going on. And by seamless, I mean, good enough. The very next sequence we're going to tackle has our two Fire Nation characters turning around to face each other. And again, this is a very easy scene to tackle. I added the wall, the ground, and part of Iroh's shadow. I didn't stress at all since the background didn't move, and I knew that the attention was all on Zuko in the middle. The exact same sentiment can be applied to Commander Zhao, but I also decided to copy and paste his soldiers to fill out the sides more, and because I think it might have looked a bit too sad and empty to draw in blank spots on either side. I also did some good old animating to Zhao's shadow, and now we have this epic battle of Zhao and Zuko standing up. The battle is so close to commence, but just not yet. We need to get a panning shot of Zuko in his ready position. This shot has some movement, but it's very slow and steady, and we all know that that's what wins the race. I took my time with the wall, the mountain, and the sky for both Zuko's portion and Zhao's portion. Our next scene has an intense staring contest taking place, and if you think this scene looks super easy to animate, well, yeah, you would be right. I mainly had to do the sky and Zhao's ears. The ears surprisingly took the most time in this scene because I also had to keyframe them as Zhao's face glides across the canvas. I could try to say more here, but honestly that would just be me padding for time. Whatever, let's just see how these past few scenes turned out altogether. There's not too much happening in this portion since the characters are hardly moving and the camera stays still for the most part. I can assure you that there will be more happening pretty soon. But finally, we finished the pre-chorus of this fight between Zuko and Zhao, and now onto the main event. In this scene, we have Zuko getting ready to firebend, and luckily for me, this scene also doesn't move around that much. And again, I don't have too much to add on, honestly speaking, because I feel like a broken record already. But I drew in the right side with the gate, the sky, and the ground before filling out the left side with the exact same things, plus one earthy iceberg in the back. One aspect that was a little bit different, however, with the other scenes, is the fact that fire is bright. Okay, thanks for coming to my TED Talk, everybody. But what I'm trying to say is that fire adds light. Okay, that didn't sound that much better, but what I'm trying to say is that the light needs to be reflected on the environment itself. I know nothing of adding the correct techniques for light, so what I ended up doing was taking the color of Zuko's fire, drawing on top of the new additions in a new layer, and then lowering the opacity of that layer by a significant margin. It ain't much, but it's honest work. The scene we just did is a preamble to this upcoming action sequence, and not gonna lie, this scene made me rethink this whole project I was doing. This short 1 to 2 second sequence took hours of my life and desperately made me want to cosplay as Aang himself. And what I mean by that is I wanted to pull out my hair in frustration. Before we get to that, however, I filled out the rest of Zuko's body with his fire, and I think it turned out quite well. That was all fine and dandy, but that wasn't the cause of all my frustrations. Luckily for you guys, all the time I spent will be edited down, so my struggles will be the length of a really deep and satisfying yawn. The trouble came from the sky you see menacingly draped behind Zuko. It was absolutely horrendous to work on. Not only are the clouds and the sky consisting of so many different shades and shapes, but they also move around the scene so much that filling out just the sides causes so many inconsistencies between the frames. My drawings definitely didn't match the original in any way, and I struggled to get it right, so I decided to start over. I then decided to switch things up by doing the exact same thing all over again. What was that about the definition of insanity? Anyways, I did very rough blotches to get the general shape, but that also ended up not looking good at all. I went back and tried doing the same thing yet again. I attempted to match the clouds to the best of my ability, and again I wasn't a fan of how it ended up looking. The backgrounds just end up jumping around too much and it just looks very odd. I did another round of the basic shapes with the intention of blurring them out quite a bit, but again they all ended up just looking the same way as before. After spamming the delete key for the 100th time and I just kept restarting and deleting, but I decided to finally try something different for my last attempt. I masked out Zuko and stretched out the frame's background. I then filled out the space between Zuko and the background to get a consistent motion. This process wasn't difficult, but it was very time consuming. I definitely spent way too long on a scene that takes maybe a second or two of watch time. And just a side tangent, but does anyone remember that scene of iCarly where Spencer worked on that claymation or stop motion movie for days at a time, just for the entire movie to be like 2 seconds long? Well, that's kind of what it felt like for me. Anyways, if anyone has any tips or tricks on how I could have better tackled this sequence, please let me know, as I'm always down to know more, and so I can avoid something like this happening again in the future. The next shot features Zuko between Zhao's legs. Okay, there's gotta be a better way to phrase that sentence. Instead of doing a panning shot, I decided to keep it a static camera because I was simply not in a good place after that prior scene. I wanted a break from the moving background, so I simply took the first and last frame and stitched them together. Then I got Zuko and pasted him into each sequence. But enough messing around, I moved on to the next scene and shifted the frame to the left as I felt that it gives us the best view of this ball of fire and draws our attention from the right of the screen to the left as Zhao ultimately blocks this valiant effort from Zuko. This was another tracking shot and I didn't want the shots to seem too inconsistent a la the earlier scene, so I ended up using a little trick. I copy and pasted a portion of the frame and then flipped the image horizontally. To avoid the scene looking like a mirror, I also used a brush to add minor differences here and there. The fire was also a ton of fun to animate because there was no worry about appearing too straight or too round or honestly worrying about it matching from one frame to another. It felt freeing adding lines wherever I wanted to. Moving along, I was quite scared with this next sequence because this kick from Zuko felt like it would be another instance of headache and frustration. However, this one ended up taking a fraction of the time. Well, it still took a little bit over an hour, but that's still a fraction of what I spent on the other scene. What I ended up doing was drawing over the original cloud, so I didn't have to worry about trying to be too consistent with the original animation sky. I then matched the flow of the camera's movement while filling in the blank spots here and there. The walls were next, and that was relatively simple, as was this entire scene in general. Zhao is on the defensive end yet again, and I moved him over to the left to make it seem like his back is cornered against this imaginary wall. Luckily for me, the camera stays on him and doesn't really pan around at all. There is some minor shaking, but nothing too major. This allowed me to not worry about the clouds changing between frames, and I was able to work on the scene like I normally would. After the background, I moved onto the fire yet again, and I was happy to make the flames as big as I wanted. This was yet another fun sequence, and I think it looks quite good. Here's the next set of scenes all together. All things considered, I'm quite pleased with how these turned out, and although I'm not a big fan of how that one scene looked, it doesn't bother me as much. Okay, that's a lie, but I'll get over it. Now it's Commander Zhao's turn to be on the offensive, and because the camera was panning yet again, I took the wall from future frames and placed them in the first frame so it appears consistent throughout. I would then fill in the differences to complete the look and go from there. It's a short scene, but a welcome one. Zuko's defensive stand is less impressive, at least visually, than Zhao's earlier, and I'm not complaining. Less impressive looking means less work for me. This is a simple shot where Zuko deflects the incoming fire. I used the same tricks from the previous scenes and was able to finish this one with relative ease. Moving this next frame over to the left was a super easy decision, barely an inconvenience. I simply drew in the rest of the wall and ground, and that was it. We have another angle of Zhao on the offensive, and I drew the wall and made sure to extend it past what we see on the screen, because this is another instance where the camera would pan and have the wall moving alongside it. I happily completed the fire segment before moving on. I initially thought this scene was just a copy of the previous scene, so I was about to gladly skip over it and place the other scene in place of it, but after taking a closer look, I realized that it's slightly different. I was so tempted to still put in the other scene in place of this one, but I decided against it, and also to complete the scene the right way. I used the same tricks again, and although the scene wasn't hard, it was super tedious and took quite a while. We then have an even closer look at Zhao's foot. I finished the background as usual, added some blur in select frames to simulate motion, and then moved on to the next scene. This portion was very nice. All I had to do was draw in a bunch of randomly colored lines to match the motion blur of the shot. I also had the pleasure of working on the fire as well, and again it was quite relaxing after the previous tedious scenes we had. Much like what's happening to Zuko here, I pushed this frame over to the right as Zuko gets swept off his feet and tumbles to the ground. I worked on the fire first, but put most of my attention towards the sky. This one didn't give me as much issue as the other scene that shall not be named because opposed to that one, this one had the sky leaving the frame and not the other way around. This meant I could freely draw without worrying about consistency, and as you can see here, this one gave me pretty much no issue. I rushed through the wall and I marked this as complete. Now let's jump on ahead to Zhao trying to finish off Zuko at point blank range. All this took was filling out the sky as the camera pans up. Just a side note, but I'm so sick of these skies at this point in time. I never thought I would miss icebergs as much as I do, but please Aang, hurry up to the North Pole already. Zuko skillfully avoids this shot by pulling off his best b-boy impressions against this unsuspecting fool. Jabbawockeez have nothing on this man. Being so close to the finish line, I mustered up the remaining strength I had to finish the last few scenes, and by that I mean I mainly took a copy and paste of the sides and filled out the changes to make the frame look a little bit more seamless. Zuko must also be part cat because he always lands on his feet, besides the other instances where he doesn't. But all I needed to do for this shot was to finish drawing the ground, which again took almost no time at all. Making it look as dirty as it is ended up being a little bit tricky however, but this scene is so quick that people won't have time to really be analyzing every inch of the frame. I guess unless you pause the video, but that would be weird. Please don't do that. Moving from toe to head, and we get a shot of Zuko looking smug. I moved him over to the right to break up that 4:3 aspect ratio feeling, and the sky was very cooperative, and I think this scene took me like 4 minutes to complete, which was a new record for me personally. I do say this in every video, I really do, but I'm finally at the last scene and I'm so tired. I think this video especially, I was tired because of that one scene that took so long. But I'm still trying to just find the right balance between working a full-time job, having a social life, a relationship, and just doing this YouTube thing for fun. Anyways, enough personal life stuff, that's not why you're here. I decided to shift this frame over so I can get more of Zhao's pathetic form to take up more of the canvas. I drew in the outline of his body and I had some difficulty figuring out the anatomy of his body, but after finishing the coloring and the rest of his torso and pants, I quickly moved on to the sky as it pans vertically up. But yeah, that's pretty much it, finally. It's time to show all the scenes fully completed in one sequence, and here we have it. This took me way too long and I wasn't expecting this much difficulty coming into a lot of the action shots. The still shots in the beginning of the video definitely did feel like they gave me a false sense of security, as I thought this video would end up being a breeze. Unfortunately, that ended up not being the case, and this might have been maybe my most difficult video so far. It was definitely quite a struggle, but luckily I'm very happy with the end results, and I'm still having fun with the process, all things considered. I also didn't expect the final culmination of scenes to be as long as it is, so thank you to those who stuck around to the end. Anyways, I don't have too much more to say, but if you want to check out this other video I did where I tried to make a comic by recreating a scene from one of my favorite Disney live-action childhood movies, Sky High, I had a lot of fun with that one. Please like, subscribe as well, and I also hope you have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.